The Construction Record is brought to you by the BC Construction Safety Alliance.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.
This is digital media editor Warren Frey.
This is staff writer Russell Hixson.
And I've been on vacation for about a week, but Russell has been working like crazy. He's got so much to tell you. Russell, take it away.
Well, I was at Buildex Vancouver this past week, and it was super fun. Lots of cool sessions to go to. Just a great opportunity to learn about a lot of kind of new cutting-edge things that are happening, and what some of the thought leaders are discussing. And so we kind of kicked off Buildex by going to the ICBA, the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, their CEO breakfast.
Which they've been doing for years.
They've been doing it for years. They always bring a good speaker, and this year they had Bob Rene, Rene Group, and one of his analysts, and they gave a talk about kind of demographics, construction, and the real estate industry, and it was really, really interesting. And I think one of the main points, one of the big interesting points that kind of stuck with me was how you have like this older generation, these boomers, and their cohort, kind of their group is reaching the end of their working years. And so they're going to transition into retirement, but that also means transitioning into kind of a segment in life where their healthcare costs start to skyrocket.
Right.
And so how do we pay for healthcare costs? With taxes.
Right.
And so kind of the cohort behind them, people, I'm 29, so people like my age, kind of the people who are in the workforce, there's not enough of them.
I'd like to point out you skipped over Generation X just like everybody else does.
My mistake.
I'm Generation X, that's why I noticed.
Salty, eh?
Nobody else notices.
So the people who are still working age, there's not enough taxes in the future to pay for all those expected healthcare costs and to fill those jobs, right? Everybody in the industry knows about the coming, kind of labor crisis in the construction industry. But there's also just a demographic crisis for every industry. There's not enough people to fill these jobs, not just construction, and to generate the tax income, the tax revenue to cover the cost of all these people retiring and who are going to have more and more healthcare needs. And so one thing that the government is doing now that the Rene Group pointed out is they're increasing immigration.
Which makes sense, especially in a country that's less densely populated as Canada.
Yeah, so they're dramatically increasing immigration, and they're going to have to keep doing that over the next next decade or so to try and maintain this tax base to take care of our healthcare system.
Which means more places for people to live.
And what's interesting is that, there's definitely political ramifications for increasing immigration. And it's just one of those things that we're going to have to figure out how either another way to create this tax base, or we're going to have to make it more politically acceptable to increase immigration in some parts of this country.
To be fair, it's not as unacceptable as it is in, say, parts of Europe or or recently America.
Right.
Like we have a much more welcoming attitude, let's say, in Canada so far.
Right. So I just thought that was kind of just these demographic realities. Whatever you feel politically, and it's just a reality that we're gonna have to face. Is our population is not growing at the rate that is taxably sustainable. And keep in mind, I am not a financial analyst or demographer, but that's kind of what I got from it, which was really, really interesting. And of course, Chris Gardner, president of the ICBA, talked about how the construction industry is, he always refers to it as the unsung hero of the BC economy. People always want to talk about the film industry, the tourism industry, different tech industries.
Yeah, those are all things you can point at and go, ooh, look shiny. But
shiny. And then kind of people in hard hats and steel-toe boots don't seem to be as sexy headlines. Yet they make up such a massive, hundreds of thousands of people get up and go to construction sites and generate this massive amount of wealth for the province, and he always is eager to point that out. So that was also interesting.
And there's crossovers to tech and the film industry and everything else in
Yeah.
construction anyway. So.
Well, I mean, I've definitely interviewed even people this week talking about how they are construction jobs are becoming tech jobs because
Exactly.
you're having to use BIM, you're having to use all sorts of different technology that's going to just get more and more.
Stuff on the site where you can just call up plans where you couldn't do that before.
Yeah, I mean, we've even done stories on people with, 3D concrete printers.
Exactly, yeah.
That's the direction, we're likely going to go in. And then also, speaking of technology, that's a good segue into what I'm going to talk about next, is I went to a really fun session, one of the cooler sessions I've been to, about cybersecurity, and we actually had a live hack demonstration where they had someone in Toronto hack a camera in the room.
That's cool.
Remotely.
I mean, it's also scary, but it's kind of cool.
It's very scary, but it was just illustrating a point about kind of the Internet of Things and how having all these internet-connected devices may be exciting on your job site, may be exciting in the office, but that has implications because those are all points at which you can be hacked. So someone from Grant Thornton LLP, is cybersecurity expert Shane Schroyer. He gave his presentation, and I think a lot of people at this point know about some of the general things, like most hackers these days, it's not like a 90s movie where they're sitting there on a keyboard sweating and typing as fast as they can, trying to breach a firewall. Shane kind of explained...
It wasn't like that in the movies in the 90s anyway.
Yeah, but...
like it was unrealistic then, too.
Right, but Shane kind of explained that everybody has a decent, most businesses and most people have decent firewalls, decent antivirus software. Their networks are already kind of hardened in these ways, and it's really not worth a hacker's time to go after breaching a network in that way. It's much easier to try and trick people and processes.
That's what they did with the Democratic mailing hack. Like they tricked Leon Panetta, or not Leon.
Well, even in our industry recently,
John Panetta, pardon me.
A city recently, I think I won't say which one, I can't remember off the top of my head, but a major Canadian city, municipality, was hacked.
That's right, yes.
Quote, hacked. They were just tricked. I mean, someone spoofed an email, which according to, the session I went to, it costs just, like $20, and you can fake an email from anybody and make it look, well, you'd have to do some research, but it can look like it's coming from almost anybody you want. And if you research, it's called a spear phishing attack. So it's more of it's a targeted attack. So if you do enough research and you understand how, a city's emails are formatted, the names of the people, what sort of projects and things they're working on, which is what these attackers did in that city. And they said, "Oh, hey, we're from the contractor. We actually have a new payment account. Please put the payment in this account." And because people either didn't have processes in place or didn't follow the processes, which are, you have to call a vendor or somebody to confirm that that's the case. Talk to someone on the phone. Some sort of way to confirm that wasn't done apparently. So. Yeah.
I should correct myself. That was John Podesta that got hacked,
Oh,
not
I
Leon
see.
Panetta. Just Leon Panetta knows his email etiquette.
For
John
the
Podesta
record.
did not. But it was the same thing you said. It was spear phishing. They said, "This is Gmail. You need to change your password,"
Yes.
and he didn't check, and he did. And if somebody
Right.
that high up in a, and that powerful can do it, then anybody at any corporation.
Yeah,
can.
and like Shane Schroyer talked about a client who was the CEO of a mining company, went to Africa to do a deal where he's going to buy a mining site. And they're a publicly traded company. So Spearfisher researched that this deal was going down, figured out the format of the company's email, and sent an email to accounts and said, "Hey, we're buying the mine. Send the funds into this account, please," and pretended to be the CEO.
It's just simple con artistry with.
And the only reason that they caught it was the email was signed Steven instead of Steve, and the CFO who signs off on all these transactions said, "Steve never signs his name Steven in his emails."
Yeah.
And that's the only reason they didn't lose millions of dollars. So I thought that was really, and specifically, I mean, these are kind of general things for any business, but specifically for the construction industry, some things that make it much more vulnerable is you have a lot of employees at a lot of different sites using a lot of different devices.
That's true.
So laptops, tablets, iPhones, you're on different Wi-Fi networks, and any time you introduce stuff like that, those are just more points of vulnerability. They have unique challenges. And also you have more people, subcontractors, other people who you don't necessarily know if they have the same processes and controls that you have.
Right.
And you have to make sure that they're following those processes and that they're making those calls, that, the account, if someone changes a payment, or making sure they follow the process to confirm that, right? And also, like I mentioned before, the Internet of Things. It's such a cool phrase that everybody talks about, how all these devices, sensors, different things, everything's being connected to a network. Well, when something's connected to a network, that's a point that you can get into the network.
Well, it's like those cheap Ring doorbells.
Yes.
I'm not even sure they're available in Canada, but they're certainly available in the States, and they're easily hacked apparently.
Yeah, obscenely easable.
So
easy to hack.
and also used by people in neighborhoods just to keep watch over people. So
right, and this has broader implications in the construction industry, because you have control systems in whole buildings that are connected to networks.
That can be controlled.
Exactly.
That's dangerous.
You have dam spillways that could be opened. A lot of people could be put in jeopardy, and a lot of damage.
It doesn't even have to be malicious. For a while there were kids climbing all over cranes. Well, what if a kid gets bored and starts screwing around with the crane and doesn't realize he's 14, doesn't realize what he's getting himself into?
Right. Right, and another thing you mentioned was that some companies, there's some myths, like some companies think, oh, we're not one of the big giant construction companies, we're not going to be attacked.
But that makes them easier to attack.
Exactly, because often some of the larger companies have the funding or the finances to have these really robust cybersecurity protocols and systems and consultants and training, and the smaller companies maybe not so much, but they also get attacked at a high rate.
And I seem to recall that it has shifted since the 90s of just people screwing around to, most of the time, hacking is state actors.
That's part of it. He mentioned that there's just people who there's whole office buildings in Russia where people, it's like an office where people have a coffee machine and they do their work, and you can hire them to do attacks. It's like a business. You can hire a bunch of hackers, like you hire a company, and there is state stuff that you have to be careful about. But
that's more of an infrastructure thing. But
people who are hired and they're doing it for profit, they're often doing like ransomware, different things. State hacking, you might not even learn that it happened.
Exactly. One way or the other, you got to be aware though.
Yeah. So that was really interesting to hear about, and just kind of how cybersecurity, the industry is evolving, and the threats are changing.
And it's involving one of the oldest industries in the world that is in many ways super traditional, which is a large weakness in this case.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that's what's going on.
Cool. Up next, we got an interview. I went to CanBIM's recent Vancouver gathering a couple weeks ago, and I have one other interview there. Sheryl Staub-French, she's a professor of civil engineering and the Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of British Columbia, and she led a panel about from the smart project to the smart city. So she's going to talk about sort of integrating smart buildings and how BIM is being used now as opposed to way back when. She started using BIM in the 90s before it was even called BIM. So it's an interesting interview, and you're going to hear it right now.
This feature interview is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association, building water and sewer infrastructure excellence since 1957.
I'm here at CanBIM 2020 with
Sheryl Staub-French. I'm a professor of civil engineering and the Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of British Columbia. And I'm also the director of the BIM Topics Lab, where we've been doing research around BIM and technology and process and innovation in the construction industry for the past 20 years.
And we were just at a panel where you were moderating it, and they talked about various issues about BIM, but one of the interesting things was that you started your first BIM project in 96, which I'm assuming is the beginning of BIM or close to it?
Yeah, BIM wasn't even a term back then. It was really around 3D modeling and the idea of having an information-rich model of our facilities, so each digital object knew what it was. So the door knew it was a door. It wasn't just squiggly lines that you were looking at. And so it's actually been longer than that. If you look at other industry sectors like oil and gas, been doing a lot more of this for a lot longer. But the building industry is a challenging industry, very fragmented. Every project is unique. And so there are very unique challenges with coming up with a really rich and accurate building information model.
And the current project you're working on, you said, because I'm going to get the name wrong.
I have several projects.
The
actually.
bioengineering.
Yeah, so
sorry.
the project that I have with UBC right now is a Campus as a Living Lab project. It's the Bioenergy Research and Development Facility Expansion Project, and it is kind of an industrial project. And we're working with UBC to better understand how BIM can benefit them throughout design, construction, and operations. And so it's really meant to kind of document how BIM can or should be used, and also capture some of those lessons learned about how to do it better on the next project.
And that was one of the issues the panel raised, how it's difficult to explain to owners, maybe not in this case, but it's difficult to explain to owners why you should be spending money on this.
Yeah, making the case for owners is really challenging, and owners are critical in terms of being clear about what they want, in terms of information about the facility, how they want it handed over, and they're also the ones who decide how to organize the project, which has a critical influence on the kinds of information that you get and the quality of that information that you get.
And another thing that was mentioned as possibly the most difficult thing of all is the cultural aspect in terms of trying to get people to adopt this new, not even new way of doing things.
Yeah, the culture change is huge, and it includes not only kind of how you train people, but what processes you use internally, and so that culture and process change is incredibly challenging. And when you're dealing with a large owner like UBC, where you have many different units, all with their own processes, all with their own people, with different levels of expertise, you do really appreciate just how significant that challenge is. And that's why it's really important, I think, to think long term. It's not like you're just going to flip a switch and go BIM. You have to really think about the incremental innovation that you can do to get to some point at some point in time. And so it's a multi-year kind of transformation that needs to happen, but it requires very deliberate action and very deliberate planning around how you're going to make that transformation happen.
And another point made was that the design and construction side is or has adopted this, but in terms of when you're operating and you go, oh, I have to take this part out and put this part in, that's not as easy as it should be.
Yeah, we've spent the last 20 years really working on the project side, and that was very challenging because you have a very fragmented supply chain, and so you had to look at architects, engineers, contractors, and the sub-trades, and getting everybody on the same page around it, and actually incentivizing everybody, and that's where the organizational side of projects comes in. For owners, that same level of transformation is going to need to happen, so that's why I think it is a very significant and complex challenge that will take many years, just like it's taken us on the project side. In many ways, they do, though, have a tremendous opportunity because as owners, especially an owner like UBC, where you can exert a lot of influence over your supply chain to get information delivered in a way that you want it.
One thing I found really interesting is Brock Commons was mentioned, and they were down to the minute in terms of putting wood on it. So you can explain how that's feasible using BIM, because it probably wouldn't be on paper.
Yeah, and it's feasible in part because when you're dealing with something like timber or steel, you can't just knock it into place. It has to fit together, and so it really makes sense to do a lot of this detailed planning. What they did on that project was really take it to the next level. So CAD Makers was the IT BIM VDC provider, and they were working with the project team to sort of figure out how are they going to make this work. And it required not just looking at how you do digital fabrication and assembly, but also how does that connect with the envelope? How does that connect with the MEP systems? Because you got to get the timber cut perfectly so that those MEP systems can actually get routed up. So it really requires you to see the whole building, and then working with everyone in that supply chain so that when the timber elements are loaded on the truck, that they're loaded in a way that matches what your erection sequence, and that those timber pieces know where they're supposed to go. And then working through, every level, how is this going to go up? How are trades going to move around on each level? And so when you actually look at the 4D simulations they created, they were incredibly detailed, and the actual installation on site was very precise, and they actually delivered that timber structure in really record time. So they saved a tremendous amount of time by using timber and that kind of detailed modeling.
And finally, you've got a wide breadth of experience with BIM, so let's not just talk about challenges, let's talk about what you've seen over the last 20-odd years in terms of progress.
Oh, there's been tremendous progress. So, given the fragmentation of the industry, it is much more difficult in our industry compared to industries like aerospace or the automotive industry, where you have a lot of big owners, or a few big owners who can just make stuff happen.
Yeah.
And so, it's a transformation across many dimensions. So not just how we model, what we model, the technical capabilities that you need to model, but it's also looking at how we organize projects, and in Canada, looking at more collaborative project delivery methods, and then also looking at the processes and the implementation of lean. We didn't hear anything about lean today, but lean construction is another paradigm shift in terms of how we execute projects, and focusing on that process efficiency side. So, and the other dimension is sustainability. And if you look at the project, especially in Canada and locally, the high-performing buildings, like, we are making significant strides in terms of delivering more efficient buildings. So when you look at all these different dimensions, we've made tremendous progress over the past 20 years.
And I said finally, but I have one more question. You're also in charge of inclusivity at UBC.
Yeah.
Have you found that this, at least in this field, with emphasis on technology, that means a more diverse set of people are coming up and adopting it?
I definitely see a bit more gender diversity in terms of there being opportunities for women to play a leading role in this. I also think what BIM enables is a more diverse workforce, in the sense that you don't require as much experience and skill, because if you work everything out beforehand, before you have that tradesperson on site and they know exactly what they need to do, you require less skill. So it does, I think, facilitate a more diverse workforce as well.
Okay, thanks. The Construction Record is brought to you by the BC Construction Safety Alliance. Through programs, services, training, and consultations, the BCCSA is making safety simpler. Find out more at bccsa.ca.